Most business owners spend 10, 20, or 30 years building their business. Then they go to sell it and either no serious buyers show up or the offers they do get are disappointing. I've started over 20 businesses, exited 6 of them, and bought close to 20 more. 3 times I made the Inc. 500 list, including a cell phone retail chain I took public and sold to Sprint, which means I've sat on both sides of the table. And in this video, I'm gonna walk you through the 6 biggest lessons I learned over these years and what I do completely differently if I were building from scratch today. The moves that decide whether your business sells for what it's worth or doesn't sell at all, and the patterns I've watched repeat across every deal. Before I get into the 6 lessons, I want to set the frame because most of what you've heard about selling a business is wrong, or at least incomplete. The number that decides what your business sells for isn't the offer. It's the gap between the offer you should have gotten and the one you actually take. And that gap is rarely about the buyer being cheap. It's about things you didn't fix before you got to the table. Every lesson I'm about to walk through is one of those things. I learned all 6 of them the expensive way, mostly on one deal that I want to talk about first because it sets up everything else. Lesson 1, owner dependency. The first one is the most common, the most talked about, and still the most underestimated. When the business runs through you, when the relationships, the decisions, the operating rhythm all sit on your shoulders and a buyer looks at the company and quietly asks himself, how is any of this going to transfer to me once this guy's gone? This is the lesson that cost me the most money I've ever lost on a single deal. And the deal was Rapid Satellite. Rapid Satellite was the largest online retailer of residential satellite TV systems in the country. We sold DirecTV systems exclusively. The business was doing about $30 million in revenue and $3.5 million in EBITDA. I wasn't trying to sell it. I got approached, unsolicited, by an investment banker representing Circuit City who said they wanted to buy it. I got excited and I moved fast. I didn't stop, take a year, and prepare the business before getting to the table, which is what I should have done. And the single biggest reason I didn't get a real multiple for it is that most of the company ran through me. I hadn't set up a number 2 who could operate the business after the transaction. I was the business. We sold for about 3 times adjusted EBITDA. If the business had been properly prepared, the deal should have been 8 to 10 times, which means I left somewhere between $17 and $25 million on the table, and I put at least a third of that on owner dependency. $6 to $8 million gone because the business couldn't run without me. The fix isn't complicated. It's just slow. You have to hire and build a strong number 2. You document your tasks. You let your team make calls without you in the room. None of that is exciting to do on a Tuesday afternoon, but it's also what decides whether your business gets a real multiple when the unsolicited offer shows up, because the unsolicited offer is exactly what you want, and it never waits for you to be ready. Lesson 2, vendor concentration. Owner dependency is the most obvious risk a buyer sees. The one I never even thought about was something similar, and it cost me on the same deal. At Rapid Satellite, 100% of our products and revenue came from a single vendor, DirecTV. We were their largest online dealer. We worked exclusively through them. It was part of our deal. And in the moment, it felt like a strength because we had the best margins, the best support, the best inventory access in the category, and we had leverage as their largest dealer. The problem is, a sophisticated buyer doesn't see a strength. He sees a single point of failure. If DirecTV walks away, raises rates, changes its dealer policy, or just gets bought by someone else, the entire revenue line of the business I'm selling can disappear overnight. That's not a deal you pay full price for. That's a deal you discount or you structure with so much risk shifted back onto the seller that you may as well have discounted it anyway. Nobody at Circuit City ever explicitly told me, by the way, this is why your multiple is lower. I only saw it clearly years later, after I'd been on the other side of the table a few times. And that's actually part of why I do what I do now with my one-on-one coaching and with the Buyable course. Because I wish somebody had told me about vendor concentration in plain English when I was building Rapid Satellite. If a single supplier, a single platform, a single license, or a single relationship represents most of your business, you don't have a business yet. You have a position in someone else's business. Fix that, or accept that whoever buys you is going to make you pay for it. Lesson 3, messy books. The next one is the most boring one on the list, and it costs people millions of dollars every single year. Messy or unreliable financial statements. When I sold Auto Finance of America to our private equity fund, our financial reporting was unsophisticated. The records weren't dirty in a bad way, they just weren't consistent. There were gaps in how revenue got recognized, the categories shifted from one period to another. They were just the kind of things you don't notice when you're running the business, but the moment a real buyer's diligence team opens the books, they notice it immediately. What that does to a deal is very specific. It doesn't kill it. It gives leverage to the buyer to negotiate. The buyer's not paying premium money for numbers he can't trust, so he discounts risk into the offer. In our case, the deal traded at 3 times instead of the 4 to 5 times it should have. I can't get into the specifics because of the NDA we signed, but the gap cost me well over 7 figures of purchase price easily. And the cruel part is that's the easiest of the 6 lessons to fix. It's not a strategy. It's not market positioning. It's clean books, consistent reporting, audited statements, and a proper P&L that ties to your tax returns. You can fix it in a year. Lesson 4, single sales channel. The next one is another overlooked one in the same category. This one showed up on the sale of IVG. IVG was a business I exited to a large public company. The majority of our marketing dollars and the majority of our sales flowed through 2 channels: affiliate marketing and SEO, strong and profitable channels that have built up over the years. To the buyer, again, those weren't strengths. There were 2 channels they didn't control, run by an algorithm and a network of partners they had no relationship with that could change tomorrow. So even though the business actually sold at a healthy price, 8 times EBITDA, the deal got restructured around that risk. 40% of the purchase price got deferred over 2 years, subject to clawback if we lost any of those channels. We collected the vast majority of the deferred portion. A small piece did get clawed back. So it didn't kill the deal. It restructured it in a way that put close to half our money at risk for 2 years after closing. And in other businesses where the channel exposure is even heavier or the buyer is more conservative, that same issue kills the deal. The lesson isn't to diversify your traffic. Everyone says that. The lesson is every channel you don't own becomes part of the deal structure when you sell, and the buyer will always price the risk back onto you, either as a lower offer up front or as money sitting in escrow that you might never see. The earlier in the build you start owning your channels, your list, your direct relationships, your traffic, the cleaner that conversation goes. Lesson 5, customer concentration. This next one is the customer side version of the same problem, and the dollar cost on this one was worse than I expected. I had a SaaS platform a few years back. The business was generating just under $1 million in EBITDA with a strong product and sticky customers. The problem was that we only had 3 high volume customers, and one of them was 70% of revenue. A SaaS business with diversified customers at that EBITDA level should sell for 5 to 7 times earnings with little to no earnout. Ours sold for 2 times earnings with a sizable earnout on top of the multiple compression, because no buyer wants to own a business where 70 cents of every dollar comes from one logo that could leave anytime. And here's what made it worse. After the close, they actually lost that 70% customer. The earnout was structured around the business holding together, and most of it evaporated. So the initial discount wasn't the full damage. The earnout collapse was the rest of it. A business that should have sold for 5 to 7 million ended up cashing out at a fraction of that, even though on the spreadsheet at the closing table, the headline number didn't look that bad. Customer concentration above 20% is the threshold where buyers start treating it as a risk factor. Above 50%, it becomes the deal. If you're sitting on a business where 1 or 2 accounts carry most of your revenue, that's the first thing to fix, because it doesn't just lower your multiple, it puts whatever you do at risk for years after you sign. Quick one before the last lesson. Most owners watching this video are quietly running the math in their head right now, wondering which of these issues already exist inside their business. I built a free exit readiness scorecard that walks you through the same gaps a sophisticated buyer would underwrite for in diligence. The link is in the description if you want it. Lesson 6, selling from strength. The last lesson is the one I don't talk about often. I cover it in my one-on-one coaching because it's harder to teach in a framework, but it's probably the single most important thing on the list. The story behind this one starts where the Circuit City deal ended. When I sold Rapid Satellite to Circuit City, there was a clause in the deal that I didn't fully think through at the time. Circuit City had an exclusive arrangement with DirecTV, and as part of that exclusivity, they couldn't have any officers, employees, or shareholders involved in a competing service. I owned another business at the time called Dish Pronto. It had the same business model as Rapid Satellite, except instead of selling DirecTV, we sold their competitor. Because I had an earnout and had to stay on for a year after Circuit City closed, the second I signed the Circuit City paperwork, I was officially listed as an owner of a competing product, which meant I had to get rid of Dish Pronto. The moment I put Dish Pronto on the market, the buyer figured out very quickly that I had to sell. So it wasn't a quiet sale. The Circuit City deal was already public, and once the buyer knows you don't have the option of walking away, the dynamic flips. The deal stops being about what the business is worth. It becomes about what the buyer feels like paying on the terms the buyer feels like offering. Dish Pronto was doing close to $2 million in EBITDA. Should have sold for 5 to 6 times. I got 3.5. And the terms were brutal. I provided 100% seller financing on the deal, which means I had to wait 2 years to collect my money. And if the business stalled under the new owner and couldn't service the debt, I was the one holding the bag. I ended up collecting the full amount, but for the entire 2 years, I was exposed to a downside that had nothing to do with the business I'd built. The Circuit City deal created the cascade because I wasn't prepared. I sold Rapid Satellite cheaply. And because I sold Rapid Satellite under the exclusivity clause, I was forced to sell Dish Pronto from weakness. One deal where I moved too fast set off another deal where I had no leverage. That's what selling from weakness actually looks like in real life. It's not just a lower number on one transaction. It's the second order damage you don't see coming. Selling from strength means going to market when you don't have to, with a business that doesn't need you, with books that tell a clean story, with customers and channels and vendors, no single one of which can sink the deal. That's the only position where you actually get paid what your business is worth. If you stack all 6 of these next to each other, the pattern is the same thing 6 different ways. Every one of them was fixable. Every one of them I could have solved in 6 to 12 months of focused work before I ever sat down with a buyer. And every one of them cost me money because I hadn't done that work when the offer showed up. So the real takeaway is simple. Always be exit ready, even when you're not thinking about selling, because many offers are unsolicited and they don't wait for you to be prepared. And an exit ready business is just a better business. It runs better, makes more money, and depends less on you.